Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and still with you on today's edition of Cairo Local Time. And of course, as promised earlier today, we discuss Egyptian-African relations and of course how Egypt is keen to boost its relationship with all the African countries, especially as Egypt will be assuming the presidency of the AU next year. Now, I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by my guest for this afternoon, Engineer المجيد Slamah, member of the Arab African Export Council. A very good afternoon to you, Engineer.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us on today's edition of Cairo Local Time. And let's first start by asking you, how can Egypt, in your opinion, regain its role as a leading country in the African continent?
Very good question. Let me at first say a little bit facts. Egypt, when it started 3,500 years ago as a big community, it was actually the first empire in the world, and the territory of Egypt did include Egypt as known today, Sudan, the north, Sudan south, part of Uganda, half of Libya, half of Chad. I'm not going to go on the other side, but actually also some parts of Saudi Arabia, of Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. That was the first empire in the history, which was named at that time the Egyptian Empire. And that was exactly 3,500 years ago.
Right.
And with the location of the Egyptian country now, which is middle or in the exact center of the Arab world countries, and then in the connecting point, or one of the connecting point between Egypt and the European country, which was the oldest countries before we discover US and this area of things. What does it mean? It just simply means that Egypt is really part, as a territory as geographically located. It's part of the Arab countries and of the African countries. It was in the very old times where Egypt was the motivation for all the civilization all over the world. Now when we come to the recent days, the relation between Egypt on one side, the African countries, and the Arab countries on the other side, it was ups and downs affected by the total political situation of each country of this, including Egypt.
Of course.
And if we go to the very short history, that's about 50, 60 years ago, on the 60s, Egypt, during the era of President Nasser, we were expanding too much into Africa. We did a lot of economy relations, we did a lot of support to them, and that's why when you go to most of these countries, especially the capitals, you will find a lot of buildings similar to the design of the Egyptian they built at that time here in Cairo and in other cities, and it was carried out, it was constructed by the Egyptian contractors. And then we had an era, due to some politics, where the relation was, well, not affected. This world is not a real one, but it was really stopped to the level that we did not have any relation with them. And when I say relation, I don't mean the political and diplomatic relation. That's another story. But there were no real action between both, and that was a very big gap. Then recently, in the last few years, with the new president and the new government, Egypt is reopening their relation with these countries.
Yes.
Of course, it's slightly different because this gap in the last 30, 40 years, when we stopped this relation, some other competition went into that countries and to that cultures, and it affected the whole story. But anyhow, we started, and it was a very big push done by the country in this direction, both politically, diplomatically, even the other parts of the government. Economically, they are pushing to a very good extent to increase their relation with the African countries. Of course, the Arab countries, that's another a little bit different because we are part of it. We are speaking the same language. We are having to a good degree the same culture, and we are trying to recapture this relation.
Indeed.
But definitely, I confirm that everybody now in Egypt is aggressively pushing into this direction.
Indeed. Let's talk a bit about how Egypt can work as a gateway for African countries, or for the African continent, to boost its volume of trade within the world.
You are saying a gate. First, before we be a gate, we have to be a part. We have to move a lot of ideas, a lot of culture, a lot of production, a lot of things from Egypt to these countries. That's before being a gate. My understanding for this word, when you say gate, you mean that something is coming from different parts and going through us to there, which, by the way, so many African countries trust of that, and they put us that we are a middle way between some new technologies coming from different parts of the world. It comes to us to be filtered, re-studied, reorganized in a suitable culture way to their culture, because definitely no discussion about that our culture to compared with the African cultures is much more closer than other countries. In other words, Africa for some time was occupied by English people and French people. This is the majority of Africa. If some countries, one or two other countries, were occupied by some other, like
Portugal
Congo,
and Spain.
yes, and so on. But the majority was French and English. Now, Egypt, because we had been occupied for some time, or ruled for some time with the English people, so we knew what about the English culture, and that's why we are very close to the African countries who is having or who were occupied by the English culture. We know how to handle it because we know both. On the other side, definitely comparing our culture compared with the French, we are closer even to the French educated African countries.
Yes.
So as a culture, we are closer, and because of that, they feel that they can treat Egypt at the first step to go in front of them. And any experience which had been used in Egypt is more acceptable. And I did not hear that only from the African countries or the African people, but also from the international society when they say if you want to go to Africa, you have to start at first to be in Egypt and have a step there.
Yes.
So that's true. We can be considered, but, and here is the point, I am against being only a gate. I do want that we as Egyptians, when we receive anything from other countries, we re-modify, we re-put a value added, a local value added, and then send it there. And in this case, we are not only making tap to them, but also we are making some profit and output from the value-added items.
Indeed, right. Like, also, let's talk about commercial relations between Egypt and African countries. Of course, they've noticed a sizable increase under the new administration, of course, of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Also, there was a main increase in Egyptian exports, which is a major catalyst really for the increase in the volume of trade exchange. Tell us a bit more about this, and how can we capitalize on this to boost the Egyptian economy?
We have to boost it. We have to do it. We do not have much choice. Okay, our production capacity in Egypt is much larger than our consumption, so we have to boost or to export a lot of what we do. To do it, we need many things to be done. At first, we are dealing with people. They like us, so we have to like them. We have to treat the African countries as they are friends, and we like them as they like us. Number two, the government have to give some sort of support in making things easier for export and more easy in communications. As example, if we go to transportation, you will find that, as example, Egypt Air is covering a little bit in East Africa, but West Africa we are very weak. As example, to go to a country like Senegal, it takes us, if we go straight forward, it takes 5 hours, but as it is now, it takes roughly 20 hours because we have to make changes either in Casablanca, Morocco, or in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. So we have to go a little bit further in the straightforward communication. I'm saying that regarding airports, I mean aeroplanes and all that. But if we go to the sea transportation, that's also the same problem. We are hearing now about direct river transportation between Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda. And if we go to Uganda and then we go to Lake Victoria, then we can go also to Tanzania and Kenya and these countries. So we are speaking about a possibility, and I know that the government is now taking serious steps in developing this way to be through River Nile, which is very positive. I know also, I'm hearing that we are discussing and seeing the feasibility of having a route connecting between North African countries, starting from Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Sudan, and it goes continuously to South Africa, which means that, so communication is very important.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, of course, as part of the Arab African Export Council, Egypt has attached great importance to develop economic relations with countries from the African continent, both, for example, in its framework of its membership in the COMESA, in the Continental Free Trade Area between the largest three African blocs, COMESA, SADC, and the EAC. How can these organizations be effective in economic cooperation and boosting economic relations between African countries, in your opinion?
I'm going to tell you a very important thing. I was visiting a country in Central Africa, in Uganda, which is exactly by aeroplane, it takes 4.5 hours.
Yes.
And some people there asked me about pineapple.
Pineapple.
Yes, can they export it to Egypt? Can they send it to Egypt? And the price there is really very low, very low. While Egypt is getting it from China and Thailand and all that, which is very far away. And then I started to calculate the transportation by air. And we found that the transportation from China to Egypt is practically half the cost of the transportation from Uganda to Egypt.
Even though it's
which
close.
means, which means that the advantage of getting a good quality and a good price from there disappear because of the transportation. So, yes, the COMESA is cancelling a lot of restrictions on what's sent. It does need some paper that we have to prove that this is a product of Egypt or of these countries. Number two, it has to go through a certain rules which is acceptable, and we have to accept it. But on the other hand, we have to eliminate some extra cost because we are not close there. So yes, the COMESA will be very useful, and all these economic relations, arrangements will be very useful, provided we complete the whole story and the whole link covering the missing items.
What are the main exports that come out of Egypt to other African countries?
Well, there are a lot. Different things. Number one, in the raw materials, and accepted, and I had been informed about that by many international companies, the Egyptian cotton is very much welcomed. Some of the engineering products, I know for sure that the electrical products is very much appreciated. Some of there are some other, the food industry is exporting a lot there. But if we put on the other side, what can be done? A lot. A lot. As example, there are a lot of things which we are trying to export it to other countries, and due to competition we are facing a lot of hard work because of the other countries have enough of it or have a different competition. As example, pharmaceutical stuff. Africa need it, and Egypt have it in a very good quality, in a very good price. So we have to be aggressively pushing in this direction. My personal opinion is that 3 items can be very well introduced if it is supported. Cotton industry, or the cotton stuff.
Textiles.
Textiles, all that. The pharmaceuticals, medical stuff, medicines, all that.
Even medical devices.
Number 3 is the services. Because, and this is the point, if we go to some Arab countries, you will find that the Egyptians are the ones who are leading these countries to high level of technology, and it's a service. If we do it directly in these countries, it will be appreciated and accepted, and in the same time it will help in two directions. Number one, some of the people who are not loaded by work here or even do not have enough work here, and accordingly some financial arrangements and limitations, they will be having a lot of excessive work if we go there. And number two, this type of things will be helping to overcome the culture gap,
Yes, of
because
course.
they will be living with their style modified according to the local native style. So after some time we will have the same or close by culture.
Indeed. Right. I can't leave you, Engineer Abdul Majid, without asking you about Egypt assuming the presidency of the African Union next year, and how will this help in boosting the role that will be played by Egypt in the African continent?
Right. Well, it's a very critical point. But 4 years ago, as we say when we are saying a story, once upon a time,
Yes.
4 years ago, when we have this government and when we had President Abdel Sisi, even before he came, 1 year before he came, when Egypt decided to overthrow some regime, political regime, the African community banned us and they stopped us from being part of the African community. Now we are selected to be the presidency of the AU,
Yes.
which is it's a lot of proud for us.
Indeed.
It's a real lot
It
of
says a lot
pride.
about how far we've come.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's true.
Absolutely.
That's true.
I'm afraid we have to leave it here. We've run out of time. Engineer Abdul Majid Salem, a member of the Arab African Export Council, I'd like to thank you very much, sir, for coming in and for your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we wrap up today's edition of Cairo Local Time. You're in the company of Angie Meher. Many thanks for watching.